The sound of raucous laughter echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek as the autumn sun dipped below the weathered buildings, casting long shadows across the boardwalks where Beatrice Greene clutched her reticule to her chest and tried to hurry past the saloon without drawing attention. It was 1878, 2 years since her husband James had been laid to rest after a mining accident, and life as a widow in the Wyoming territory had taught her to keep her head down and her wits about her. "Well, looky here, boys. Mrs. Greene's out without her mister again," slurred a voice that made Beatrice's skin crawl. Horace Wilkins, the cattle broker who'd been trying to buy her small ranch since James died, stepped off the saloon porch, flanked by 2 equally intoxicated companions. Beatrice quickened her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Good evening, Mr. Wilkins. I'm just heading home." Now, little lady," Wilkins said, moving with surprising speed to block her path. His breath reeked of whiskey and stale tobacco. "You been turning down my offers for too long. Maybe we should discuss it proper like." "I have nothing to discuss with you," Beatrice replied, trying to sidestep him, but his companion, a red-faced man with yellowed teeth, moved to cut off her escape. "Town ain't safe for a pretty widow without protection," the third man said, closing in from behind. "Horace here's being mighty generous, offering to take that worthless patch of dirt off your hands." Beatrice felt her back press against the wall of the mercantile. The street had emptied as dusk settled, most decent folk already home for supper. "Please let me pass," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Wilkins leaned in closer, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "James Greene's been worm food for 2 years. When you gonna accept you can't run that place alone? I believe the lady asked you to let her pass." The voice came from behind the men, deep and steady. They turned, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the dying light. The stranger stepped forward, and Beatrice could see him clearly now, broad-shouldered, dust-covered from the trail, with a weathered face partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. His hand rested casually near the revolver at his hip. "This ain't your concern, mister," Wilkins spat. "This is private business between me and the widow." The stranger's eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, flicked briefly to Beatrice before returning to the men. "Looks to me like the lady's being harassed by 3 drunk fools. That makes it my concern." "You don't know who you're dealing with," the red-faced man growled, reaching for something in his coat. What happened next was so quick Beatrice barely registered the movement. The stranger's hand flashed to his gun, drawing it smoothly before any of the men could react. He didn't fire, just held it level, pointed at the ground. "I don't need to know who you are to recognize men who'd corner a woman alone," he said quietly. "Now back away, nice and easy." Wilkins looked like he might argue, but something in the stranger's stance made him reconsider. "This ain't over," he muttered, gesturing to his companions. They backed away, casting dark looks over their shoulders as they retreated to the saloon. Beatrice released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid, Thomas Kincaid." He holstered his weapon with the same fluid grace with which he'd drawn it. "May I escort you home, Mrs. Greene? Beatrice Greene?" She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "That would be very kind, Mr. Kincaid." As they walked, Beatrice felt her heartbeat gradually slow to normal. "Are you new to Silver Creek, Mr. Kincaid? I don't believe I've seen you before." "Just passing through," he replied, scanning the street ahead. "Or I was, might stay a while now." "Oh, what changed your mind?" A small smile touched his lips. "Just now." "Meeting a lady who needs someone watching her back." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I assure you, Mr. Kincaid, I don't require a guardian. I've managed on my own these past 2 years. No offense intended, Mrs. Greene, but those men didn't strike me as the type to give up easily. They reached the edge of town where a small wagon waited, hitched to a patient mare. "This is mine," Beatrice said. "My ranch is about 2 miles north." Thomas looked at the darkening sky. "Would you allow me to ride with you? These roads can be dangerous after dark." Beatrice considered him for a moment. There was something in his eyes, a steadiness, a quiet strength that made her nod despite her usual caution. "Very well, Mr. Kincaid." He untied his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding, from the hitching post nearby. "Lead the way, Mrs. Greene." "I'll follow alongside." As they traveled the rutted road out of town, Beatrice found herself stealing glances at her unexpected protector. "What brings you to Wyoming territory, Mr. Kincaid?" "Work, mostly. I was a cavalry scout during the war. These days I take odd jobs where I can find them. Drove cattle up from Texas last season." He adjusted his hat against the breeze. "And you mentioned a ranch. My husband James and I came west 6 years ago. I have a small place, 50 acres, a few horses, some cattle." She kept her eyes on the road. "Nothing special, but it's mine." "And those men want it," Beatrice sighed. "Mr. Wilkins represents Eastern investors looking to consolidate land for cattle operations. They've bought most of the small ranches around here." She straightened her shoulders. "But I won't sell. James and I built that place together. It's all I have left of him." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Family land matters. Worth fighting for." They rounded a bend, and Beatrice's ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. A small creek cut through the property, lined with cottonwoods whose leaves were turning gold in the autumn air. "It's beautiful," Thomas said quietly. "It is, isn't it?" For the first time that evening, Beatrice smiled genuinely. "Would you care to stay for supper, Mr. Kincaid?" "It's the least I can offer for your help today." "I wouldn't want to impose, you wouldn't be. Besides, it's getting late, and the nearest hotel is back in town." After a moment's consideration, Thomas nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Greene, I accept." Inside the cabin, Beatrice moved with practiced efficiency, lighting lamps and stoking the fire while Thomas tended to their horses. The interior was simple but well kept: a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with an iron stove, and doors leading to what Thomas presumed were bedrooms. "You can wash up there," Beatrice said when he returned, pointing to a basin. "Supper won't be fancy, I'm afraid, just stew and biscuits." "Sounds perfect," Thomas replied, removing his hat and gun belt. "Haven't had a home-cooked meal in months." As they ate by lamplight, Beatrice found herself relaxing in the cowboy's presence. There was something comforting about having another person at her table after so many solitary meals. "How long have you been on the trail?" she asked. "Too long," Thomas said with a faint smile. "Left Kansas City in early summer, worked my way west." "No family waiting for you somewhere?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents young. Had a brother, but he didn't come back from the war." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly. "The war took so many." Thomas nodded, then deliberately lightened his tone. "This stew would make a restaurant chef jealous, Mrs. Greene. Beatrice, please, and thank you." She hesitated, then added, "There's a spare room. The ranch hand's quarters. He left last month for California." "You're welcome to it for the night." "I appreciate that, Beatrice." His eyes met hers across the table. "And you should call me Thomas." Later, after showing him to the small room off the barn, Beatrice stood on her porch watching the stars emerge. The encounter in town had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. What would have happened if Thomas Kincaid hadn't appeared? The sound of footsteps made her turn. Thomas approached, carrying an armful of firewood. "Thought you might need this for morning," he explained, setting it beside the door. "Thank you." Beatrice wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Not just for the wood, for everything today. Those men in town, Thomas said, his expression serious in the porch lamplight. Has that happened before? Beatrice sighed. Wilkins has made offers before, increasingly less polite, but tonight was the first time I felt truly afraid. Thomas leaned against the porch railing. He's desperate for your land, the creek, Beatrice explained. It runs year-round, even in drought. Water rights are everything out here. And you're determined to stay. This place was James's dream, our dream. She looked out at the darkened landscape. I know people think I'm foolish, a woman trying to run a ranch alone, but I can't bear to let it go. Thomas was quiet for a moment. You need help, though, a ranch this size. I had a hand until recently, haven't found a replacement yet. She turned to face him. Why am I telling you all this? You're a stranger passing through. Sometimes it's easier to talk to strangers, Thomas said. No history, no judgments. Beatrice studied his face in the soft light. Are you really just passing through, Thomas Kincaid? He held her gaze. I wasn't planning to stay, but plans change. Something in his voice made her heart beat faster. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Beatrice. He touched the brim of his hat and turned back toward the barn. Sleep came fitfully to Beatrice that night, her dreams filled with Wilkins's leering face, and then, unexpectedly, with Thomas's steady blue eyes. Morning brought a crisp autumn day, sunlight streaming through her window. When Beatrice stepped outside, she found Thomas already up, splitting wood with powerful, rhythmic strokes. You didn't have to do that, she called, crossing the yard toward him. Thomas paused, wiping his brow. Thought I'd make myself useful before I head out. Disappointment flickered through her, though she tried to hide it. Of course. Would you like breakfast before you go? Over coffee and eggs, Thomas seemed preoccupied, his gaze occasionally drifting to the window. Something wrong? Beatrice asked. Been thinking about your situation, he replied. Those men might not give up so easily. Beatrice set down her cup. I've faced difficult people before. Not like Wilkins, Thomas said, his expression grave. Men like that, when they're humiliated in public, they don't forget. What are you suggesting? Thomas hesitated. I'm between jobs at the moment. If you're still looking for ranch help, I could stay on for a while, just until things settle. Beatrice blinked in surprise. You're offering to work for me, if you'll have me. I know cattle, horses. Can mend fences, anything you need. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Thomas looked away, almost embarrassed. Let's just say I've seen too many good people pushed around by men like Wilkins. He met her eyes again. Besides, your land is worth protecting. Beatrice considered his offer. Having help would be a blessing with winter approaching, and there was something about Thomas Kincaid that made her feel safer than she had in months. All right, she said finally, but I can't pay much. Room and board and what cash I can spare after expenses. Thomas nodded. That's fair. As the days passed, Beatrice found herself watching Thomas as he worked around the ranch. He moved with quiet efficiency, tackling tasks without being asked, mending the corral, repairing the barn roof, bringing in the remaining hay before the first snow. One evening, a week after his arrival, they sat on the porch after supper, the air cool but not yet bitter with winter. You never mentioned what you did before the war, Beatrice said, curiosity finally getting the better of her. Thomas's hand stilled on the bridle he was repairing. My father had a small farm in Missouri. I worked it with him until I was 18, then the war came. He resumed his work. After, I couldn't settle back to farming, too many memories. So you've been wandering ever since, more or less. Took what jobs came my way. His fingers worked the leather with surprising gentleness. What about you? Before you came west, Beatrice smiled at the memory. I was a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania. Met James when he came to repair the schoolhouse roof. He talked about the West like it was paradise, open land. opportunity. And was it paradise? It was harder than he described, harsher, but also more beautiful. She looked out at the land they'd claimed, bathed now in twilight. Even in the hardest times, I never regretted coming. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Some places get into your blood. The following Saturday, Beatrice needed supplies from town. Though Thomas offered to go alone, she insisted on accompanying him, refusing to be intimidated away from Silver Creek. As they drove the wagon down the main street, Beatrice could feel eyes on them. Word traveled fast in small towns, and Thomas Kincaid's presence at the Greene Ranch had surely been noted. "I'll handle the general store," Beatrice said as they pulled up to the hitching post. "Would you mind checking on the mail?" Thomas helped her down from the wagon. "Meet you back here in an hour." The general store was busy with weekend shoppers. Beatrice worked her way through her list, exchanging polite greetings with neighbors. She was selecting coffee beans when a voice spoke behind her. "Mrs. Greene, surprised to see you in town after our last meeting." She turned to find Horace Wilkins, sober this time but no less menacing. "Mr. Wilkins, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I hear you've taken in a stray, that drifter who interfered in our business." "Mr. Kincaid is working for me," Beatrice replied evenly. "And what happened was hardly business." Wilkins's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You should be careful who you trust, Mrs. Greene. Men like that have pasts, dark ones usually." "Is that a threat, Mr. Wilkins?" "Just friendly advice. My offer for your land still stands, though I should warn you the price drops every time you refuse." "Then it must be worthless by now," Beatrice said coldly. "Good day, Mr. Wilkins." She paid for her supplies with hands that trembled slightly, angry at herself for showing weakness. Outside, she found Thomas waiting by the wagon, his expression darkening when he saw her face. "What happened, Wilkins?" she said simply, allowing Thomas to help her load the supplies. "Making veiled threats about you, actually. Said I should be careful who I trust." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Did he threaten you directly?" "Not in so many words." Beatrice sighed. "Let's just go home, Thomas." As they drove out of town, Beatrice could feel Thomas watching her. "You're wondering if Wilkins was right," he said finally, "about trusting me." Beatrice kept her eyes on the road. "I don't know anything about you, really." "What do you want to know?" She glanced at him. "Have you ever killed a man?" Thomas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Yes," he said finally. "During the war and twice after, both times defending myself or others." His voice was steady, matter of fact. "I'm not proud of it, but I don't run from it either." "Thank you for your honesty," Beatrice said softly. "You should know who's sleeping in your barn," Thomas replied. "If you want me to leave, no," Beatrice said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I don't." The first snowfall came in early November, dusting the ranch with white that glittered in the morning sun. Thomas found Beatrice on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the transformed landscape with childlike wonder. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said as he joined her. "I never tire of the first snow." "It is," Thomas agreed, though his eyes had shifted to her face, flushed with cold and excitement. Beatrice caught his gaze and blushed deeper. These moments had been happening more frequently, lingering looks, hands brushing as they worked together, conversations stretching late into the evening. She told herself it was natural, two lonely people finding companionship, nothing more. "I was thinking," Thomas said, changing the subject, "we should check the north pasture fence today. Make sure it'll hold through winter." "In the snow, best time to spot weak points. Where snow piles up, that's where the strain will be greatest." They rode out together after breakfast, their horses leaving twin trails through the fresh powder. The north pasture stretched along the creek, bordered by a stand of pines that whispered in the light breeze. As they worked, checking and reinforcing the fence line, Beatrice found herself stealing glances at Thomas. He'd changed in the weeks since his arrival, the trail-worn drifter replaced by a man who moved with purpose, who seemed to belong on this land as much as she did. "Thomas," she said suddenly, "why did you really stay?" He looked up from the fence post he was securing. "I told you, you needed help. There are plenty of ranches that need hands. Why this one?" Thomas straightened, removing his gloves. "When I rode into Silver Creek that day, I wasn't planning to stop, just passing through like I've been doing for years." He took a step toward her. "And then I saw you backed against that wall, afraid but still defiant. Something shifted." Beatrice's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "I've been drifting so long, I forgot what it felt like to have something worth staying for." His eyes held hers. "Someone worth staying for." Before Beatrice could respond, her horse whinnied sharply, head raised toward the tree line. Thomas tensed, hand moving to his gun. "What is it?" Beatrice whispered. "Not sure." Thomas scanned the trees. Could be nothing. Could be the crack of a rifle split the air. Thomas grabbed Beatrice, pulling her down behind the shelter of a large boulder as a second shot kicked up snow where they'd been standing. "Stay down," Thomas ordered, drawing his revolver. "Who's shooting at us?" Beatrice gasped, fear coursing through her. "Can't be sure, but I'd bet on Wilkins or his men." Thomas peered carefully around the boulder. "They're in the trees, using the pines for cover." Another shot rang out, chipping stone above their heads. "We're pinned down," Thomas muttered. "They've got the range advantage with that rifle." Beatrice's mind raced. "There's an old hunter's blind about 50 yards east in that cluster of rocks. James used it during deer season." Thomas nodded. "I'll draw their fire. When they're focused on me, you make for the blind. I'm not leaving you exposed, Beatrice." His voice was firm but gentle. "Trust me." Before she could protest further, Thomas moved to the edge of the boulder. "On my signal, run east and don't look back." He took a deep breath, then suddenly stood and fired 2 quick shots toward the trees before diving behind a fallen log several yards away. The rifle cracked again, focused on Thomas's new position. Beatrice gathered her courage and ran, crouching low, toward the rocks she'd mentioned. She heard Thomas fire again, keeping their attackers' attention. The hunter's blind was just as she remembered, a natural formation of rocks creating a small cave-like space with a narrow opening that provided both cover and a view of the surrounding area. She crawled inside, heart pounding. From her new vantage point, Beatrice could see movement among the pines, at least 2 figures. One held a rifle, while another appeared to be working his way around to flank Thomas's position. Without thinking, Beatrice grabbed a stone and threw it as hard as she could into a thicket of brush far to the right. The noise startled the men, making the rifleman swing his weapon toward the sound. In that moment of distraction, Thomas broke from cover, firing at the rifleman and forcing him back. The second man shouted something, and both retreated deeper into the trees. Thomas waited, watching for any further movement, then carefully made his way to Beatrice's hiding place. "Good thinking with that rock," he said as he joined her in the cramped space. "You may have saved my life." "Are they gone?" Beatrice asked, still trembling. "For now, but we should get back to the ranch. It'll be dark soon, and I don't like our odds out here at night." They retrieved their horses, which had thankfully not strayed far, and rode hard for home, taking a circuitous route to avoid being followed. Back at the ranch, Thomas insisted on checking the cabin before allowing Beatrice inside. "All clear," he said finally, holstering his gun. "But I think you should stay away from the windows tonight." As darkness fell, they sat close to the fire, the day's events hanging heavy between them. "It was Wilkins, wasn't it?" Beatrice said finally. "Or men working for him," Thomas agreed. This isn't just about land anymore, Beatrice. It's personal now, because of you, because you stood up to him, Thomas nodded. Men like Wilkins can't stand being challenged, especially publicly, and now I'm here living on the land he wants. He stared into the flames. He won't stop. What do we do? We could go to the sheriff, but without proof. Beatrice stood suddenly, pacing the small room. I won't be driven from my home, Thomas, I won't. I'm not suggesting you should be. He rose, catching her hand as she passed. We'll face this together. The touch of his hand on hers sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Together, she repeated, looking up at him. Thomas's eyes darkened as they held hers. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his free hand to her cheek. I meant what I said earlier, Beatrice, about finding something worth staying for. Beatrice leaned into his touch. I've been so afraid to feel anything since James died, afraid of losing someone again. I understand fear, Thomas murmured, been running from my own for years. And now I'm more afraid of walking away from this. From you. When his lips met hers, Beatrice felt something within her awaken, a part of herself she'd thought buried alongside her husband. Thomas's kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deeper as she responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. They broke apart, both breathing unsteadily. Thomas rested his forehead against hers. I don't want to rush you, he whispered. You're not, Beatrice assured him. But we have other concerns right now. She reluctantly stepped back. Wilkins won't wait long for another attempt. Thomas nodded, gathering his thoughts. Tomorrow I'll ride into town, talk to the sheriff. If nothing else, I can make our suspicions official. That night, Thomas insisted on sleeping in the main room, positioned where he could watch both the front and back doors. Beatrice protested, but finally agreed, touched by his protectiveness. In the morning, she found him already awake. Coffee brewed and breakfast started. You should stay here today, he said as they ate. Keep the doors locked. And what will you tell the sheriff exactly? That unknown men shot at us, but we have no proof it was Wilkins, Thomas sighed. It's thin, I know, but it's a start. After Thomas departed for town, Beatrice tried to occupy herself with household tasks, but anxiety kept her checking the windows despite his warnings. By mid-afternoon, with no sign of his return, her worry deepened. The sound of approaching horses brought her to the window. Relief flooded her when she saw Thomas, but it quickly turned to concern when she noticed he wasn't alone. Sheriff Morgan rode beside him, along with two other men Beatrice didn't recognize. She met them on the porch, questioning Thomas with her eyes. Mrs. Greene, Sheriff Morgan greeted her, tipping his hat. Mr. Kincaid here has been telling me about your troubles with Horace Wilkins. It's true, Sheriff. Yesterday someone shot at us on my property. The sheriff nodded. So I heard. These gentlemen might interest you. He gestured to the strangers. Federal Marshals Reynolds and Cooper. The older of the two marshals stepped forward. Mrs. Greene, we've been tracking a land fraud operation across 3 territories. Horace Wilkins is a key figure. Land fraud, Beatrice repeated, confused. Wilkins isn't just a broker, Thomas explained. He's been working with corrupt officials to falsify deeds, pressure legitimate owners off their land, then resell at inflated prices. When Mr. Kincaid described your situation, Marshal Reynolds continued, it matched the pattern perfectly. The focus on water rights, the escalating pressure tactics. We've been building a case for months, added the second marshal. Mr. Kincaid's information may be the final piece we needed. Beatrice looked at Thomas in amazement. How did you know to go to the marshals? I didn't at first, Thomas admitted. I went to Sheriff Morgan, who mentioned that federal investigators had been asking questions about Wilkins recently. One thing led to another. We'd like to use your ranch as a base for a few days, Mrs. Greene, Marshal Reynolds said. We believe Wilkins will make another move soon, and when he does, we'll be ready." The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. The marshals positioned themselves strategically around the property, watching and waiting. Thomas rarely left Beatrice's side, their newfound closeness a quiet comfort amid the strain. On the 4th night, Beatrice woke to Thomas's hand over her mouth, his voice a bare whisper in her ear. "They're here. Stay down." She nodded, and he removed his hand, moving silently to the window. Outside, shadowy figures were approaching the barn. "The marshals," Beatrice whispered. "In position," Thomas confirmed. They saw them coming. They watched as the intruders Beatrice counted 4 gathered near the barn. One of them was unmistakably Horace Wilkins, his voice carrying faintly through the night air. "Burn it," they heard him order. "Barn first, then the house if she doesn't come out." Before the men could act on the command, lanterns flared to life all around them. "Federal marshals." Reynolds's voice boomed. "Drop your weapons." Chaos erupted. 2 of Wilkins's men immediately surrendered, but Wilkins himself and another man made a break for the horses. Thomas was out the door in an instant, Beatrice close behind despite his earlier instructions. The marshal's deputy tackled one man, but Wilkins managed to mount his horse. Thomas drew his gun but held his fire, unwilling to shoot a man in the back. "Wilkins," he shouted instead. "It's over." The broker wheeled his horse, and for a terrible moment Beatrice thought he might charge Thomas. Instead, with a curse that carried across the yard, he spurred his mount toward the open gate. He never made it. Marshal Cooper stepped from the shadows, clotheslining Wilkins from his saddle with a rifle barrel across the chest. The broker hit the ground hard. The wind knocked from him. "Horace Wilkins," Cooper said, standing over the gasping man. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted arson, and about a dozen other charges we'll sort out later." As the marshals secured the prisoners, Thomas turned to Beatrice, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, then surprised herself by laughing, a release of weeks of tension. "I think I am. Actually, I think I'm better than I've been in a very long time." Thomas smiled, pulling her into his arms as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. "It's over, Beatrice. Your ranch is safe." "Our ranch," she corrected softly, looking up at him. "If you want it to be." His answer was in his kiss, tender and certain in the growing light. 2 weeks later, with Wilkins and his conspirators safely in federal custody awaiting trial, Beatrice stood on her porch watching Thomas work with a new colt in the corral. The afternoon sun caught the gold band on her left hand, not her old wedding ring, but a new one, simple and sturdy like the man who had given it to her. They had married quietly, with Sheriff Morgan and a few neighbors as witnesses. Some in town had whispered about the hasty union, but Beatrice paid them no mind. At 32, she knew her own heart, and Thomas, at 36, had waited long enough for a place to call home. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Kincaid?" Thomas asked, approaching the porch with a smile that still made her heart skip. "About how strange life is," Beatrice replied, reaching for his hand. "If Horace Wilkins hadn't cornered me that evening, if you hadn't happened to ride into town at that exact moment." "Some might call it fate," Thomas said, pulling her gently into his arms. "You believe in fate, Thomas Kincaid." "I believe I was meant to find you," he answered simply. "Everything before was just the path leading me here." As the sun dipped toward the distant mountains, casting their land in golden light, Beatrice rested her head against her husband's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The widow and the drifter, both lost in their own ways, had found in each other not just safety or companionship, but a love as vast and enduring as the western landscape that had brought them together.